Hello my dear viewers, thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, and making those videos a bit more popular than they are right now. Clothar I became the king of the Franks in the year 584 AD. At the time, he was only 4 months old, and what opened the door of succession to him was death of his father Chilperic. He ruled in the western part called Neustria, with the capital in Paris. In the year 614, he united all the Frankish realms, the last one being Austrasia, by deposing 10-year-old Sigebert and taking his throne, and killing his steward, his great-grandmother, Brunhilde. The nobility opposed the new ruler and made it harder to rule the entire kingdom. In 620, the nobility forced the king's hand to give Austrasia to his son Dagobert, who at the time was only 19, and the reins of power rested on the nobility. The chronicler, who we assigned name Fredegar, writes as follows. In the 40th year of Clothar's reign, a certain Frank named Samo, from the district of Soignies, joined with other merchants in the order to go to do business with those Slavs who are known as Wends. This is the only time that the chronicler gives us any information regarding our hero, the only information being that he is from the land of the Franks. This sentence is everything that we know about hero of this audition, a merchant from the land of the Franks. This text was used as a paradigm to tell that Germanics are the only ones who led the Slavs or created countries for them, even that we know that kings existed in province of Dacia and bordered the Byzantine and Roman empires and fought against them with their titular kings. Samo's name means also by himself or alone in some Slavic languages, makes me believe that he might have not been a Germanic man. He might have been Latin, maybe it's an adoption of a name. You never know what was going on back in the day with the merchant class. Samo could have also been a title of the Slavic people that bestowed upon this merchant not his real name, meaning ruling alone or a lone ruler. But we get information where this merchant was from. He was from the district of Soignies. Sorry for that, I can't really read Latin very well. Germanic name or the Frankish name that was recorded is Senonagus. It could have been also a Slavic name, the place where he hailed from, but we don't know where it was. That's the biggest problem with it. He could have been from the region of Seine, or he could have been from the province of Belgium, which both of these would make him a Frank. There's also one more thing. He might have been an influential person, because not everyone can just organize a merchant campaign into the Slavic lands that are under the Avar rule. And it also tells us that there was no Iron Curtain, there was no blockade of information and trade between the East and West, where Slavs on the East dwelled, and in the West where the Germans and Franks dwelled. As we can see, commerce did exist. This commerce probably was not about slavery. And I must say, it definitely wasn't about slavery, because the slave rings happened in Europe during the Viking Age, during the rise of Islam, where the Muslim Ummah conquered the African peninsula, Middle East, that is Levant, and Persia, and they loved slavery. Shit, they do love slavery to this day. I mean, go to Qatar and ask a local worker where he's from, and he will tell you that he's from Indonesia. Or, well, Central Africa. Okay, let's get back to the text, and let's see what Mr. quotation marks Fredegar has to tell us. The Slavs had already started to rise against the Avars, called Huns, and against their ruler, the Kagan. The Wends had long since been subjects to the Huns, who had used them as Belfusi. Belfusi means a double regiment. It does not tell us much, I tell you that. It does not tell us much. He probably meant as like front troops, that is meat shields, because that's what Avars used the Slavs as, but we don't have a clear explanation, so take it as you wish. Whenever the Huns took to the field against another people, they stayed encamped in battle array while the Wends did the fighting. If the Wends won, the Huns advanced to pillage, but if they lost, the Huns backed them up and they resumed the fight. In my previous video, there was a part when I talked about how there was a strategic on how to fight against Avars, and it was a part that called on scoundrels, dogs, and mischievous, only caring about money. Yeah, we can see that here as well, and just in this sentence. The Vands were called Belfusi by the Huns because they advanced twice to attack in their war bands, and so covered the Huns. Every year, the Huns wintered with the Slavs, sleeping with their wives and daughters. In addition to the Slavs paid tribute and endured many other burdens. What did I tell you? They are scum. There is no wonder that the Lombards, after winning, they allied with the Avars first, and they won against the Gepis. They betrayed their own people, their own race, basically, not their people. I don't think people back then cared if you were white or not. I mean, they definitely looked at that, but they didn't care that you were the same religion, that you spoke the same language. For you, there was for nobility, it was your country against other country. So they allied against the Gepids. They smashed them, and Avars settled in Pannonia. And the Lombards were so scared of this victory that they thought Avars gonna attack them, and they moved into Italy. And that's why we have the Lombard invasion of the Italy, because of their stupid decisions. I mean, let's be honest, the Lombards probably did the best thing for themselves by running away from those evil barbarians. I mean, Huns were brutal, but these guys are just scum of the on the earth, because Huns would have honesty to kill you before taking your wife, and those guys just did not care about such a thing. The sons born to the Huns by the Slavs, wives and daughters, eventually found this shameful oppression intolerable, and so, as I said, they refused to obey their lords and started to rise in rebellion. Here's an interesting thing, that the rebellion didn't start with the Slavs, with the generation of Slavs that was oppressed like that by the Avars, but the next generation who were basically a mix of Avar and Slavs. They started to rebel because they probably saw themselves as, well, partially Avar, and they didn't like this treatment. When they took to the field against the Huns, Samo, the merchant of the whom I spoken, went with them, and his bravery won their admiration. An astonishing number of Huns were put to the sword by the Wends. Reconciling his parts, the Wends made Samo their king, and he ruled them well for 35 years. Several times they fought under his leadership against the Huns, and his prejudice and courage always brought the Wends to victory. Samo had 12 Wendish wives, who bore him. Samo had 12 Wendish wives, who bore him 22 sons and 15 daughters, which tells us that he probably adopted the paganism of the Slavs that he ruled over. After this, we don't get anything about Samo and his kingdom from Mr. Fredegar. He gets mentioned in the year 630 when Dagobert seizes the throne of his dead father and begins his rule over the Frankish kingdom. In this year, the Slavs, or Wends as they are called, killed and robbed a great number of Frankish merchants in Samo's kingdom, and so began a quarrel between Dagobert and Samo, king of the Slavs. Dagobert dispatched Sicarius on embassy to Samo to request him to make a proper amends for the killing and robbing of the merchants by his people. Samo had no wish to see Sicarius and would not admit him to his presence. But Sicarius dressed up as a Slav and so got with his followers into Samo's presence and fully delivered to him the message that he had been instructed to deliver. But, as it is the way with the pagans and the men of wicked pride, Samo put right none of the wrong that had been done. He simply stated his intention to hold an investigation so that the justice could be done in this dispute as well as in others that had arisen between them in the meantime. At this point, the ambassador Sicarius, like a fool, addressed threatening words to Samo, for which he had no authority. He declared that the Samo and his people owed fealty to Dagobert. Taking offense, Samo replied, "The land we occupy is Dagobert's, and we are his men on no condition that he chooses to maintain friendly relations with us." Sicarius retorted, "It is impossible for Christians and servants of the Lord to live on terms of friendship with dogs." "Then if," said Samo, "you are God's servants, we are his hounds, and since you persist in offering him what we are within our rights, to tear you to pieces." And Sicarius was forthwith thrown out of Samo's presence. King Dagobert probably thought of this as something different than an invasion to provoke the Slavs. He simply sent Sicarius or Sicarius, it's hard to tell if it's a man of Germanic or Latin origin, to provoke the Slavic king. Samo. As we saw, the conversation escalated quickly, as Sicarius thought that Samo was behind the slaughtering of the Frankish merchants, and Samo just brushed it off as a thing that Slavs do, which probably, since he was the king, he might have been right on that. They might have been tribes that didn't care about Samo's kingship. And one thing that Samo did was said that he wants a special title from the king of the Franks, a status probably that would allow him more freedom in the east, since he would not care anymore about their western border. As we saw, Sicarius thought of this as a matter of honor. He didn't want Slavs to get away with something as a murder of Christian merchants in the foreign lands. So he spilled the beans basically onto the king, and king threw him out. When he came to report to Dagobert the outcome of his mission, the king confidently ordered that the raising of a force throughout his kingdom of Austrasia to proceed against Samo and the Wends. 3 corps set out against the Wends, and the Lombards also helped Dagobert by making a hostile attack on Slav territory. But everywhere the Slavs made preparations to resist, an Alemannic force under Duke Chrodobert won a victory over them at the place where they had entered Slav territory. And the Lombards were also victorious, and like the Alamans took a great number of Slav prisoners. Dagobert's Austrasians, on the other hand, invested on the stronghold of Vogastisburg, where many of the most resolute Wends had taken refuge, and were crushed in 3-day battle. And so they made for home, leaving all their tents and equipment behind them in their flight. After this, the Wends made many a plundering sortie into Thuringia and the neighboring districts of the kingdom of the Franks. Furthermore, Dervan, the Duke of the Sorbs, a people of Slav origin, long subjects to the Franks, placed himself and his people under the rule of Samo. In the 10th year of his reign, Dagobert learned that the Wendish army had entered Thuringia. He raised a force in Austrasia, placed himself at the head of the town of Metz, crossed the Ardennes, and approached Mainz, with the object of the crossing the Rhine. With him was a corps of picked warriors from Neustria and Burgundy, under the dukes and counts. The Saxons sent a messenger to Dagobert to excuse them from the tribute that they paid to his fisc, and they promised zealously and bravely to stand up to the Wends, to guard the sector of the Frankish frontier. Dagobert, on Neustrian advice, agreed to the Saxon proposals, and the Saxon envoys took an oath upon weapons, clashing them together as their custom is for the whole Saxon people. But the promise was of little effect. Nonetheless, Dagobert excused the Saxons the tribute they owed him. Since the time of the first Clothar, they had given 500 cows yearly. This ceased with Dagobert. We have the first diplomatic issues between the Franks and the Saxons, and this one being the lessening or cancellation of tribute that was bestowed upon them during the reign of Clothar I. And in the exchange, Saxons would guard the provinces that were exposed to the Slavic raids by the Sorbs, Pomeranians, Obodrites, all those northern groups that lived in Germany. Although our chronicler writes that they didn't really fully deliver their promise, and they probably let some through. And one more interesting thing is that the Saxons didn't have money. They didn't have economy based on money. They probably had a treasury, had gold and all those sorts of stuff, but they didn't mint money to pay the tribute to the Franks, which is really funny that they gave them cows instead of, well, anything else. Okay, and Fredegar writes later on like this. In the 11th year of Dagobert's reign, the Wends, on the Samo's orders, were raiding widely and often crossing the frontier to lay waste to the Frankish kingdom, spreading over the Thuringia and Order territory. Dagobert came to the city of Metz, and here, on advice of his bishops and lords, and with the consent of all great men of his kingdom, placed his son Sigebert on the throne of Austrasia, and allowed him to make Metz his headquarters. Bishop Cunibert of Cologne and Duke Agizel were chosen to control the palace and the kingdom. Having given his son a sufficient treasure, he provided him with all that his rank required and confirmed the gifts he had made by a separate charters. Thereafter, it is reported that the Austrasians bravely defended their frontier and the Frankish kingdom against the Wends. So we can see that Dagobert is splitting his kingdom, just giving administrative region to his son, and gives few people to control him, so he doesn't do anything stupid. He gives him Austrasia, and Austrasia is the German part, basically, of the empire. It's Germany. And they start winning against the Vandish raids. But then, of course, something happens in the medieval era. This is not modern times when nothing ever happens. In those times, everything ever happens. And the next year, more troubles come to the Frankish kingdom. Duke Radulf, son of Chamar, who was made Duke of Thuringia by Dagobert, fought repeated engagements with the Wends, and he had beat them and put them to flight. These victories turned his head. Time and again he behaved aggressively towards Duke Agizel, and this led on preparations for a revolt against Sigebert. 9 years later, or 6 years later, sorry for that, my head is really, I'm looking outside, it's beautiful, birds are singing, it's sunny, and I'm here, sounding like I have diabetes reading this thing. Just a thought, okay? Anyway, in 639, Mr. Radulf decided that he had enough of Frankish rule, and he led a revolt against the Franks. In the 8th year of Sigebert's reign, Radulf, Duke of Thuringia, impetuously rose in revolt. Sigebert summoned all the leading men of Austrasia to suppress him, crossed the Rhine with his army, and was joined by all the peoples of his kingdom who lived in the districts across the river. Sigebert's army first fell upon a son of Chadobald named Farah, an accomplice of Radulf, and killed him. And all Farah's people who escaped death were taken off to servitude. The commanders and the rank and file swore to no another that they would none of them spare Radulf's life. The oath was not kept. Sigebert and his army passed through the forest of Buhonia. For those who wonder what is Buhonia, it's Buchenwald. It's part of Hesse in Germany. It's just a big forest, basically, in that part of Germany. Just don't worry about it. Forest of Buhonia, and hastened on without pausing into Thuringia. Observing this, Radulf put up a wooden stockade round his position on a rise above the banks of the Ustrut in Thuringia. And when he had assembled every possible man from all parts, fortified himself with his wife and children with the field work to withstand a siege. Sigebert arrived with his army and invested the camp, while Radulf, sitting tight within, prepared for a vigorous defense. But the battle was joined imprudently, owing to the youthfulness of King Sigebert. Some were fighting the same day, others preferred to await the morrow, and they were unable to give anonymous counsel. Seeing this, the Duke Gorimald and Adagizel took great pains to guard Sigebert, appreciating the danger that he ran. Bubbo, Duke of Avignon, with some of Adagizel's men, and Inowels, Count of Saint-Tau, with his compatriots, and a large part of remaining forces, advanced at once to entrance of the camp to attack Radulf. But Radulf was in touch with certain dukes in Sigebert's army, and knew that they would not attack him with their men. So out he came through the camp entrance, and threw himself and his warriors on Sigebert's, and made a carnage to be marveled at. The men of Mainz turned traitor in this battle. Several thousand of warriors fell there. They say Radulf went back into the camp after this victory, while Sigebert, like his followers, were seized with wildest grief, and sat there on his horse, weeping unrestrainedly for those who had he lost. For the Duke Bobbo, Count Inowales, bravest of warriors of his nobles, and the greater part of the army that had followed them to battle, had been slain before Sigebert's eyes. Furthermore, the domestic Fredulf, allegedly a friend of Radulf, also fell in battle. Sigebert and his army spent that night in their tents not far from the enemy encampment. And on the day following, seeing that he could do nothing against Radolf, he had sent a delegation to request that he might recross the Rhine unmolested and be permitted, he and his men, to go home. Radolf was in transports of pride. He rated himself king of Thuringia and concluded treaties of alliance with the Wends and made overtures to the other neighboring peoples. He did not, in so many words, deny Sigebert's overlordship, but in practice did all he could to resist his power. I threw this part about Sigebert and Radolf for free. This has nothing to do with our story except the end of it. I could have read you the end of it because at the end we see that Thuringians were raided by the Slavs, but here, I kind of need those Slavs to help me against the Franks, so I'm gonna sign some treaties with them to help me out. Or maybe there were trade treaties. Who knows what the treaties were? We don't have any sources about that, and especially I myself don't know what they could have been. So we're just leaving it at that. The Civil War wasn't only the feudal thing; it wasn't only a Christian Frankish thing. Not only the white people love to kill each other over how much money they have to owe to somebody. No, during the migration era, also the Avars, a year later, have a civil war. And this is what Mr. Fredegar has to write about this. In this year there broke out a violent quarrel in the Pannonian kingdom of the Avars or Huns. The matter in dispute was succession to throne. Should it be Avar or a Bulgar? The forces of two parties gathered together and there was a fight. In the end, Avars beat the Bulgars, who 9,000 strong were chased out of Pannonia with their wives and children. They sought asylum of Dagobert, begging him to take them in and give them a home in Frankish territory. Dagobert gave instructions that they might winter among the Bavarians, and in the meantime he would deliberate with the Franks about their future. When they were dispersed among the Bavarian homesteads for the winter, Dagobert took the advice of his Franks and ordered the Bavarians to kill the Bulgars with their wives and families during the night in their homes. The order was at once carried out. Only Alzeko, with 700 men and their wives and families, survived. They found safety in Wendish March. Alzeko and his following lived for many years with the Wallach or Wendish Duke. I must say this is the most evil shit I read ever, but let's remember that Bulgars are basically Huns. Like Turkic Bulgars are Hunnic people. They are fucking evil. Those guys massacred Germans before, so to me, I mean, it's different generations. It's like different. It's 200 years between those happenings. Avars kinda also are the Huns, but not really. So I don't really cry for them, but it is really fucking evil to just kill somebody in your home when they think, oh, I'm safe here, and you just kill their whole fucking family. It is so disgusting, Mr. Sigebert. But we have in history a same thing that happened like this. When Cumans escaped the Tatars, that is not Tatars, Cumans are the Tatars, the Mongols, when they escaped from the steppes, some of them escaped to Hungary. They settled near Buda, under like Buda, on the plains of Buda, and the peasants started lynching them, or like just like some villages just started disliking them, like killing the Cumans. The Cumans rose in revolt against the Wenceslaus. Was it Wenceslaus? Or was it Bela the Fourth? I think it was Bela the Fourth. And they basically, Bela wanted to use them against the Mongols as a nomadic host, because two nomadic hosts would fight each other, so the Mongols would probably lose because Cumans would have the allies, that is nearby territory, as Hungarians. But the Cumans just turned on them and started burning the Hungarian villages. So the Hungarians had to kill the Cumans, and then the Mongols invaded. So imagine taking those migrants in was not a good idea. Usually taking migrants in is a very bad idea. You have to be really naive to believe that they're gonna be just, taking orders from you, following you. And let's not forget that the Roman Empire was flooded with migrants who were armed and literally carved up the empire for themselves. Okay, let's get back to the text. Well, not really, because I want to get back to Samo, Samo's kingdom, actual territory. Where does it end and where does it start? Where it does start with the border with the Frankish Empire. But does it reach the beyond, does it also border the Saxons? Like, does it own the Obodrites, the Polabians? Do they own Silesia, Poland, Slovakia, Czechia, Austria, part of Italy? What do they own? We don't know. But here it's written that they own Carantans. The Carantans are Slovenes. They are basically Slovenes. It's part of Austria, quotation mark. And that is written that they escaped to the Vents, which might have been under Samo or not. It might have been an independent Slavic chief owning that, but it's written here that there it is. The remaining Bulgars escape to Carantan territory. There's also a modern research where modern that is from the 90s and early 2000s, but it's really backed off by the research from the 1960s by Nadia Profantova and Michał Lutovsky. So I don't know what to think about it, but their research said that this kingdom was part of Moravia, Austria, Slovakia, and parts of Croatia and Serbia. Why do I mention this? Well, because there is a dispute. Where did the uprising happen? Where did it all start? Was it Slovakia or Czechia? But there's also a third thing, which is Slovenia, because there is a book or, well, a codex text telling us about the conversion of Bavarians and Carantines. That is, Caranthians, those Slovenes. And it says that Samo is a Slav, which is bullshit because he was a Frank. Well, Frankish or Latin Frankish or just Frankish, we don't know. But there is a fragment that tells us that this is a seat of power. Carantan is a seat of power of the Samo and his kingdom. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, who knows? I wasn't there, I can't tell you. And here is another big thing. What happened to his kingdom after his death? Nothing. It still operated as a functional kingdom. Probably it was split between his successors, not necessarily his sons. We know that in the year 650, thanks to archaeological digs, Avars returned to parts of Slovakia, so probably Nitra fallen under the Avar rule once again. We also have supposed list with names of his sons that kingdom was split between. Supposed because, it probably was a medieval forgery. And their names were Moravot, Vladok, Svantos, Samoslav, Hormidor, Moimir. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean medieval, but 1700s forgery. What is important about this kingdom is that it created polities that would shape the region into their liking, such as Czech kingdom. But it's also important that Slavs made this kingdom. Slavs created this thing, not Samo, and they put Samo on the throne. Slavs chose the most intelligent or cunning man among them and put this Frank on the throne because they thought he would rule the best. And I'll be honest, the kingdom only collapsed after his death, so I guess he wasn't that bad. It's nothing new to me, as Germanic tribes, for example, Teutones, were ruled by a guy with a very Celtic name. So back in the day, people didn't really care as much about their nationality or language, what they spoke. They cared only about who was ruling them. If the guy could provide money, if he could provide women, if he could provide victories, you was golden. And that's what they cared about. And it's time to end this video here. So thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, and have a good one.